How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to our VMware NSX-T series, where we spent quite a bit of time. What are we looking at? Probably nearly a dozen videos on the data center lab build. And now that was kind of a deeper dive into how to actually get the environment to where we need it to be in order for NSX-T to do its job. Now, the thing that we're going to talk about now and transition into is NSX-T. So I'm going to be deploying NSX-T in this video. I'm going to show you guys how to roll it out, and there's a couple different ways that you can do it. I'm going to show you one of those two ways, but I'm also going to explain the other way and how you could deploy it through vCenter, or you can deploy it directly to an ESXi host. So both of them are pretty straightforward. Normally I would recommend through vCenter and go that route with it, but you can't, I wouldn't say you can't always, but in my lab, it's easier for me to deploy to the host because, well, I have management access to the host where the networking is the crutch, right? So let me go ahead and talk to you a little bit about what we're going to be doing. So I've already got the file moved over. So as a matter of fact, if I was to pull up my RDP session, I went ahead and deployed a second Windows box. But if I look over here in my documents, I've already got the OVA pulled over to my jump box. So I'll be able to deploy that to this server right here, right? I'll still be able to deploy it to this server, but the networking will be tied to the lab port group right here, which is why I have to deploy it to the host and not via vCenter, but that's a whole other story in and of itself, which I actually just explained. So now that we've talked about that, so we're going to deploy, and it takes a minute for it to go across. So you're moving an 8 gig file. It's actually multiple, it's one file that's got a lot of stuff built into it. Your edge nodes, all of the security, the firewalling, all the VIBs that we're going to be pushing to the hosts that we're going to do. So that's where I want to talk about in this video, or in this particular diagram. I'm going to spend some time going over the details here to give you guys kind of a high-level overview of what we're going to be putting into play. So I'm going to go ahead and get out of the way, and I'm going to zoom in on what we're actually going to be doing here. So these dotted dashed lines going to each one of the hosts, once we have NSX-T deployed, one of the first things we have to do is, one, we have to license it. Once we license NSX-T, then we're going to go ahead and add vCenter server. In this case here, it'll be DC1 VCSA. We're going to add the vCenter as a compute manager. And once we add it as a compute manager, that will allow NSX-T and vCenter to talk back and forth to each other. And by being able to talk back and forth to each other, NSX-T will be able to discover all of the clusters first, and then all of the hosts that live inside of those clusters. Because like I said, in order for you to do the job that you need to do, you got to be in a cluster. That's why I put hosts into clusters right away when I had them joined. Now, we're dealing with ESXi 6.7. Before we can actually do any of the installs of NSX-T VIBs on the host, which is pushed via the control plane to the host so that the NSX-T VIBs can get installed, we have to take every one of the hosts and we have to upgrade them to ESXi 6.7 Update 3. Update 1 is too old. So I'm actually going to be doing that in, when we go to actually install, I'm going to show you the error because I've done it enough times to know right where it kicks off. So we'll go through to that point, and then we'll pause the NSX-T installation to the host level, and then I'll walk you through how to do an ESXi upgrade. Now, you could do it one or two different ways, right? You could do the ESXi upgrade ahead of time. So, but sometimes you don't realize the issue. So I wanted you guys to see the issue real quick, and then I can transition over. Because really, once you have all the details you need in place, things are really, really easy to work with. Now, I'm going to talk to you about how the NVDS comes into play. the network adapters that are attached to it, and the capabilities that are needed before we actually do any of the work, just so you understand the logic workflow. So once we have, when we first get NSX-T up and running, we license it, we give it a, we add vCenter Server as a compute manager. Once those two main capabilities are in place and working, then the next thing we're going to have to do before we do any of the upgrades, before we do any of the installations, the first thing we're going to want to do, post ESXi upgrade to a supported version of ESXi that NSX-T can be installed on, is we're going to do a single host deployment first, which is going to be cluster 2. That will require me to build out some details. So the first one we're going to have to roll out is going to be what they call an uplink profile. An uplink profile is going to be how the communication is going to be synced and tied to the host. So let me go ahead and zoom in on host 4 real quick, because that'll be the first host that we focus on. So let me go ahead and get out of the way just so there's more room. What we're going to do is on host 4, we have VMNIC 6 and VMNIC 7. What that essentially will do with an uplink profile is we're going to need a few things. We're going to need to make sure that the underlying transport for this lab port group is made sure that it's sitting at a MTU of 9,000, because we're going to be leveraging Geneva encapsulation in order to allow communication for the overlay segments. Now, but before I get any further with that, most of the deployments that I do with NSX-T in production environments today are VLAN back segments. And most people don't do overlays. Not to say that they don't, but the majority of the customers I work with don't do overlay networking. A lot of times they just use VLAN back segments. They use that as a way to push NSX VLAN back segment port groups to the ESXi host. By doing that, you're able to not have to mess with your default gateway. If you want your default gateway to sit on physical hardware and be a top of rack device, VLAN back segment is the easiest way to achieve that. You gain the visibility and the firewalling capability that NSX-T provides by bypassing the VDS and going to an NSX-T enabled VDS, or the NVDS, it's right here. Or if you're on 7.0 or newer, you could just add NSX-T bits to the existing VDS, which we'll talk about more in detail when we get to 7.0 after we do all of our upgrades. Now, what will end up happening is this uplink profile is going to tie these two NICs together. And what you'll do is you'll determine how NSX, the switch that we're going to be pushing to the host, is going to load balance traffic. So there's a couple different ways that you can do this. You can do a failover order. So for example, VMNIC 6 will be active, VMNIC 7 will be passive, or just waiting there in case there's a physical NIC loss. I don't prefer to use that. I prefer using a load balance source, and that allows me to use both network adapters at the exact same time. Now, when we get into the overlay networking, which I'll talk more about that in an upcoming video once we get past the basics here, because there's some details that we're going to need to put into play that will change the way we're going to do things a little bit, or how we approach them. There's actually a specific there's a couple of VLANs that we're going to have to create in order to allow communication between the compute and the edge clusters for the devices we're going to be deploying. So without getting into overlay networking quite yet, I'll talk more about that in detail when we get to overlay networking, which is going to be in a couple of videos from now. We're going to have these guys right here that are going to be put into an uplink profile. The uplink profile will then be called from the deployment. So we're going to create the uplink profile first. Once the uplink profile is created, then we'll be able to go through the deployment at the host level. So there's only a single host, so we're going to, instead of doing a cluster level deployment, where we're going to take a transport node profile, which is different than an uplink profile. And that's why I'm doing it the way that I'm doing it, so I can show you both ways to deploy. Because I've had a lot of customers that only want to deploy NSX on a couple of hosts in a very large cluster. In NSX-V, you couldn't do that. You had to deploy to every host in a cluster or be selective in which hosts you did, so you might have to pull a couple of hosts out of a cluster. In NSX-T, you don't have to do that. You can simply deploy to whatever specific host you want to, instead of doing a cluster level deployment with a transport node profile. When you go through and do your single host deployment, you're going to have to give the NVDS a name, so you'll name this guy, and then you'll have to determine what transport zones it'll exist inside of, which VLAN and overlay transport zone it'll be in. I'm going to create 2 transport zones, and how that'll come into play. I'll talk about that more when we get into the GUI, so it'll be easier for you guys to see. But essentially, once that's in place, then I'll be able to go through and add in any of the additional profiles like LLDP, Eric. There's a couple of other ones that we'll need. And then once that's in place, then we'll be able to go to the next stage and push the NSX bits to the host. Now, once that's started, one of the key things that we'll have to make sure is that the ESXi hosts can resolve DNS. Because what will end up happening is they'll need to know how to use a DNS lookup to call NSX Manager. Because then they're going to be setting up a communication channel, the CCP, the Centralized Communication Protocol plane, where it's going to be communication from the host back to NSX Manager, going back and forth on a continuous basis. That's going to be needed for a lot of different things to happen. Firewall rules to get pushed, monitoring, things like that. So once that happens, you're going to form a connection with the host. The bits will get installed inside of the host, and now you'll have NSX capabilities built in. So with that being said, there's a lot of things to worry about. Now, the next thing is, and I'm skipping over a couple of key pieces right now just to keep things as simple as I can, even though I know this is probably complicated if you've never dealt with this before. Now, the other hosts right here, hosts 1, 2, and 3, they're in a bigger cluster. We're going to be doing a cluster level deployment here, which means we're going to have to leverage a transport node profile. A transport node profile is a little bit different. We'll still need an uplink profile for these specific network adapters, but when you call a transport node profile, you are going to be pulling in more details, meaning there will be capabilities that will be needed that, I don't want to put it that way. When you do this, you'll create the uplink profile for both of the network adapters. So depending on how your network adapters are wired, you may have to call a couple of different uplink profiles. The problem is when you create one transport node profile, you're kind of you're locked in with whatever the uplink profile is. So you can't mix and match your uplink profile to your transport node profile on a per host basis. It's all for one or none for all. So that's why it's important to make sure that you're using the same NIC mappings on all your hosts. If you've got a mix match, make sure that you've separated those out or you've recabled, stuff like that. Now, once you have your uplink profile locked in and you've got your transport node profile locked in, you're going to basically then map the transport node profile to your cluster, and then all of your hosts in that cluster will start getting the NSX-T VIBs. VIBS stands for VMware Installation Bundle, and this is where all the NSX-T bits are going to get pushed. Now, that's the basics, right? Now, because of the fact that we're going to be dealing with overlay, there's a couple of other things that we need to take into consideration. Remember that VLAN I was just talking about? Well, in order for that VLAN to work, we need what they call an overlay VLAN. The overlay VLAN is going to be the VLAN that is used for communication in the backbone, right? Which would be your top of rack devices. That VLAN has to be deployed everywhere in the network so that communication downstream to your host is possible. So the trunk links, if you don't already have the VLAN there, this is going to be what we refer to as an infrastructure VLAN to allow ESXi hosts to talk to each other for overlay traffic. Now, what's going to end up happening is when you create your overlay, you're going to have an overlay transport zone, and that'll determine which hosts can talk to each other via the overlay. The overlay transport zone, and there's another one called the VLAN transport zone. We're going to be mapping both transport zones to all 4 of our ESXi compute nodes, or what they refer to as transport nodes in NSX-T. So the transport nodes are actually going to be running virtual machines on them, and you're going to have NSX-T VIBs installed. That's what a transport node means. It's providing, NSX-T is providing a transport for any of the VMs mapped to NSX-T port groups, whether they're VLAN backed or overlay, it doesn't matter. The transport is going to be NSX-T. Now, the overlay transport, or any overlay communications, use Geneve for encapsulation. So it needs a 1700 byte overhead. So we're going to create, when we create the communication, we're going to have to create an IP address pool. And that IP address pool is going to be how the NSX-T VIBs are going to call a kernel, which is going to be how the TEP, the tunnel endpoints that we're going to be deploying for overlay communication, that's going to be how that is tied to the host. Now, what's going to end up happening is that TEP pool is going to be randomly assigning IP addresses to the host as it gets installed. So you might not be able to tie your whatever IP. I mean, you can statically configure some of this stuff, but on the edge node, you can statically configure it. On the transport nodes, you're calling from an IP pool. So you could do DHCP as well. I'm going to be doing an IP pool just because of the fact it's easier. Now, when you do this, your uplink profile, when you're creating your uplink profile, you're going to have to specify what your transport VLAN is going to be for your overlay communication. So I'm going to be using, for my compute nodes, VLAN 170, and for my edge nodes, for them to communicate, I'm going to be using 171. Those are the VLAN IDs I'm going to be using. I'm going to have 2 TEP pools that I'm going to be creating. I'm going to be creating one for TN pool, which is for the transport node pool, and one for EN pool, or for edge node pool. 2 different ranges of IP addresses that are going to get mapped. At the edge pool will be called, now their default gateway will be sitting on the CSR 1000V in 170 and 171. Those are going to be the IP address ranges we're going to be using for that communication. Now, once that is all said and done, we'll be in really good shape at that point in order to get everything running where we need it to. Now, again, that transport, that uplink profile, that transport VLAN, and the MTU need to be set up to something greater than 1600. I'm just going to throw out 9000, but we're going to make sure that that communication inside this lab port group right here, we're going to have to make sure that that transport MTU is 9000. So the maximum MTU you can give it, so that you're not going to be doing any type of fragmentation or splitting up, encapsulated overlay packets. It's not a good thing to try to do. So once that is all done and you have all of your communications in place the way you need it to, you'll be in really good shape. So that's basically what we're going to go do. Now I'm going to skip ahead just a little bit, and we're going to be doing both VLAN back segments, and we're going to be doing overlay segments. And I'll talk more about how that comes into play a little bit later. But the NVDS is going to be how we're going to be tying all this stuff together. The NVDS will be handling essentially all the details for both VLAN and overlay back segments. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get out of the way. I'm going to go ahead and minimize this out. I'm going to go pull up my RDP session, and my VMs are created. So what I'm going to go do is, if I wanted to, let's say for example, compute cluster 2 was where I was going to install this guy, I would right click here and say deploy OVF template. I'd say local file, choose file, and I'd be able to say documents, and then choose this guy, and then go through the deployment process. That's how you would do it through vCenter. Well, unfortunately, I won't have the ability of doing it that way. So, because I don't want to deploy, cancel here. I don't want to deploy my NSX manager inside of a virtualized ESXi host. The performance will suck. So instead, I'm going to go plug up here, and I'm going to click into type in 10.255.1.100 advanced. So from the jump box itself, I'm going to come in here, I'm going to type in root and then the password. Close that out. Click in virtual machines. I'm going to say create and register a VM. Deploy a virtual machine from an OVF or OVA file. Click next. This is going to be NSX-MGR. I'll just put in here dash MGR. I'm going to click on this guy, documents, grab this file. Now this is the full version of NSX. This is not the limited export version you would get if you were to download from VMware Users Group or get a trial version of NSX-T. This is the full copy of 3.1, and I'm going to be applying a license to it as well. You won't be able to see any of that. I'll show you where you put the license, but I won't actually be showing you the license. So that's basically what we're going to do. This will allow me to test out full capability of everything in NSX-T, because at the end of the day, I am studying for my VCAP in NSX-T, both the design and the deploy. So that's something that we're going to need. So I'm going to go ahead and click on open. Go ahead and get out of the way. Click on next. We're going to put it on DS2. Click next. And the networking we're going to put it on, we're going to say lab port group. And this is kind of important here. We have a couple of different capabilities. If we put it on medium, we're saying 6 CPUs, 24 gigs of RAM. If I say small, we're going to be saying 4 CPUs, 16 gigs of RAM. So this is supports for Global Manager production deployment. So Global Manager is a mechanism used for NSX Federation. We're going to be talking about multi-site and federations at a later point in time, but just so in case you're wondering. Now we've got 300 gigs of hard drive space, VMware hardware version 10 or greater. So lab port group is going to be the network we're going to put it on. Small the deployment size, thin provision the disk, power on automatically. Now, this is really, really important. We're going to go ahead and we're going to add in here a new host because we need an NSX manager entry. So we're going to type in DC1-NSX MGR, and then the IP address 172.31.1. And I'm going to say, what IP addresses are my options here? I can do 51. I'll do 61. Click on add host. There we go. So now that it's available, I'm going to say done. I'm going to click on next, and this is where we're going to have to specify all of our networking properties. So I'm going to say application. So it's going to be a lot of repetitive information here. So you need a 12-character password. So I'm going to use the password we've been using, so capital P @SSW0RD, and then adding 1234. You could do VMware 1 bang a couple times if you'd like, but I'm going to be using this. So it's going to be capital P @SSW0RD 1234, and wash, rinse, and repeat until we have all these entries filled. Okay, so we're going to leave that there. Networking properties, we're going to say the host name is going to be NSX-MGR. Now you have NSX Manager, you have NSX Global Manager. So we'll see what that looks like when we get into federations. But for right now, the management network IPv4 address is going to be 172.31.1.61. The net mask is going to be /24. The gateway is going to be 172.31.1.254. DNS server list is going to be 172.31.1.253. The search list is going to be nsx.local. The services configuration, NTP server. I'm not going to worry about that. Enable SSH and allow root SSH logins. And there's some internal properties. I'm not going to mess with those. I'm going to click on next. And then these are all the details that are going to get applied. I'm going to go ahead and click on finish. So now the deployment has started. So it's going to take some time for this to get rolled out. You're moving about a 9 gig file. So I'm going to pause this until we're in good shape. Now, while this is deploying, I'm going to pause. All I'm going to do is log in, give it a name, license it, and I'm going to go and add a compute manager. That's it. After that's done, I'm then going to take everything we talked about in this video. In the next video, we're going to go through and start building our uplink profiles, our transport node profiles, all the things that we need to do in order to get the initial deployment in place and get that all squared away. Now, while this is working, I'm going to show you guys how to do a ESXi host upgrade. So I'm going to come back over here to compute cluster. I'm going to come to the, I'm at the cluster level. I'm going to right click, or I'm sorry, not right click. I'm going to go to updates. And I'm going to go to Update Manager Home. The first thing that I've got to go do is I have to go and say ESXi images. I have to import. So it's going to ask me where I want to go. I'm going to say Browse. And I have to go to this PC. I'm going to pause real quick and go grab it. So the update that I want is this guy right here. 6.7 Update 3 14320.388 is the version of ESXi that I want. I'm going to click on Open, and that's going to go ahead and take a couple minutes for it to upload from my network. Now, we're still working on a deployment here, so that's going to take some time. This will usually takes a couple seconds for it to trigger, but once it does, it goes by pretty quick. Alright, so the upload has begun. It's a little slow because of the fact that I'm copying an already pretty large file. Once I do this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you guys how to create a baseline and then run a check on existing hosts. So the host is almost there. Once that's done, perfect. Now we've got that. I'm going to go to baselines. I'm going to say new baseline. I'm going to call this guy ESXi upgrade. So it's going to be an upgrade, not a patch or an extension. Click next. I'm going to select that specific version. Click next and finish. So now what I've got to go do is I've got to go back to hosting clusters. I've got to go over here and I've got to go to host updates, and I've got to click on attach a baseline. I'm going to attach the baseline here, ESXi upgrade, attach it. Now it's been attached. Now what I get to go do is go back to overview, and I need to see I have 3 unknown compliance. I need to go ahead and check compliance. So I'm going to say check compliance. So now what it's going to go do is going to go scan all of my ESXi hosts to see how many of the hosts actually have the correct version of code. Now here's the funny part. All of them are going to fail. So that sucks, but it is what it is. So once it does that, it should come back to 3 have non-compliant baselines, which says it's on the wrong version of code. And then I'll be able to remediate once it gives me my updates. I'll be able to come over here to host updates. It'll tell me that their status is, I forget what it is. I'll be able to click on it and go remediate. Non-compliant, right? So if I go back over here to overview, you have 3 non-compliant baselines. I'll be able to come over here to host updates, click this guy right here. It tells me which hosts are not compliant, and then I'll be able to click remediate. So I did that ahead of time just so you guys would see what that would look like, and we'll be in good shape there. So I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing here. I'm going to go to host updates. I'm going to say attach a baseline, ESXi upgrade. Let me go ahead and get out of the way. Click attach, go to overview, check compliance. So I'll go ahead and do host 4 right now, just because of the fact we're waiting. Let me go see where we're at with the upload. That's going to take some time. So this is actually a good use of our time. Okay, so now we have 1 non-compliant host. We're going to go to host updates, click on this guy, it tells us which specific host. I'm going to go ahead and say remediate. We're going to accept the license terms for the EULA. Click on OK. And it says, okay, pre-check has found one issue that will block remediation. We're going to go ahead and it's telling me that DRS should be enabled. So, okay. So we're going to go ahead and say done. We need to go to configure, and that DRS is turned off at the moment. So we're going to go ahead and say schedule DRS. We're going to go ahead and just say, actually no, sorry, take that back. We're going to go to configuration, quick start. Actually no, DRS. We need to click on edit. That's right, we need to turn DRS on. That's right, it's on edit. Click on OK. There we go. We're going to go back over here to the host under updates, host updates. We're going to remediate. Go through that process one more time. It's going to run a pre-check. And it said, okay, everything's ready to go. So DRS, the cluster was there, but DRS wasn't enabled. I'm going to go ahead and click on remediate. And then the host is going to go into maintenance mode here in just a second. There are no running VMs on it, so we'll be in good shape there. It's going to go ahead and remediate it. And I can actually come over here. We're still uploading. And I'll click on this guy on host 4. And what will end up happening is after a short period of time, open that guy up. It's running a little bit slow, but that's okay. It's in maintenance mode now. It's going to go ahead and remediate the entity. Click back over here. This virtual machine, you'll see in just a second, it'll go ahead and start doing a reboot. I'm going to wait till that actually does its thing. Alright, so it took a couple seconds, and we can see that it is beginning to reboot. If we look over here, we're at 47% on remediation, and the host is starting to load a new version of code. So that's exactly what we're looking for it to do. It's going to take some time for it to actually do this, but it actually downloads it to the host over that secure channel that it builds when it brings the host into vCenter upon its first adding of it. And then it begins to do everything, all the cool stuff that it needs to. So, and now you can see the VMware build releases 143203888, or 388, excuse me, which is going to be update 3. So we're going to give that some time to do its upgrade. Once it's done, we're steadily moving along. I'm going to go ahead and just close this out real quick. Let me check on virtual machines here real quick. And NSX Manager's pulled on. Now, one of the things you can do, let me go ahead and scoot this over to the right while I'm busy doing this thing. Click on NSX Manager, and NSX Manager is in the process of booting. This will take some time. This seriously takes like 10 or 15 solid minutes for it to do its thing. And one of the things that I like to do while this is coming online is I like to do a start, a Charlie Mike Dave to bring up the command prompt. And this server's under a little bit of load because of all the stuff that I've got going on to it. We're going to run the command, and I'm going to do a ping to, what is the entry? DC1-NSX Manager. So DC1-NSX-MGR-T. So it's already responding to DNS, which is good. So I'm going to let that do its thing until it's good to go, and then remediation is still at 47%. It'll probably stay there until the host is reloaded. So, but now you've seen a remediation. So I want to do that on that host because that'll be the first one we do. So I want it to go without a hitch. So that'll be basically what we'll do, and we'll see the install happen pretty quick. So now we're on update 3. I'm going to jump back over here to this guy, get out of the way, and then after a couple minutes we go to the summary tab. Once the communication has finished and the entity is done doing its reboot, then you'll see this move over to 14320388 and all that good stuff that goes along with that. So I'm going to pause briefly while this comes online. Okay, so that happened actually really quick. So it's synchronizing. It'll take a couple minutes for it to fully do its thing, but you can see the new version of code is 14320388, which is good, which is telling me everything that I need to do is done, and the synchronization process is complete. So we're in good shape there. Now if I come over here, I'm going to go ahead and close this console window out. This will take some time. So at this point in time, folks, I'm going to just pause the video until this boot up process is complete. Once the process is complete, I'm going to go ahead and license and add the compute manager, and we'll be good to go with this video. So I'll be back in just a couple seconds. Alright, so after a period of time, our login prompt is available. So I've been pinging it consistently since pretty much the beginning. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel that. I'm going to go up and open up a web page. Might take it a second or two for it to respond. Yep, there it goes. So we're going to go ahead and type in https://dc1-nsx-mgr.nsx.local. That should redirect us. We're going to get a privacy error. That's fine. Now here's the login. We'll type in admin, and then that password reset, capital P @SSW0RD1234. Hit the enter key for login, and voila. We're going to get logged into NSX Manager. It'll take a couple seconds for it to pull up. Okay, so we get the end user license agreement. I'm going to go ahead and scroll to the bottom. And I understand and accept the license terms. Continue. Not joining the CEIP. And then it says some features are not supported with endpoint license. Please upgrade the license to support more, to use more supported features. I'm going to click on manage licenses, and then we'll be redirected to this. So they give you a license out of the gate, right? But you can't do anything with this. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my license. I'm going to apply it, and the way you do that is by simply clicking add license, paste it in here, and add. That's literally all you have to do. So I'm going to pause and do that real quick. Okay, so I added my license. It says I have, I'm good to go, and I'm going to go ahead and migrate away. So under system licenses, and then I'm going to go over here to fabric, and then compute managers. I'm going to add a compute manager. I'm going to come in here, and I need to plug in dc1.vcsa, or I should say dc1-vcsa, dc1-vcsa, and it's going to be vCenter, so dc1-vcsa.nsx.local, and then the username is going to be administrator at vsphere.local, and the password, and then click on add. This will take a couple seconds for it to reach out. We should get a little thumbprint that pops up and says it's not trusted, or I forget exactly what it says. Thumbprint is missing. I'm going to go click on add. And after a couple seconds, it should pop up. And once it does, it'll say in progress. This will stay like this until it's completely up and running and we're in good shape. So I'm going to pause until that is complete. So its registration status is registered, but the connection status will continue to say connecting for some time. I think it takes like 30 seconds to a minute. It says down right now, but give it a few more seconds. There it goes. So it's up now. Today at 9:25 this time. Okay, so cool. So with all that being said and done, now we have completed our installation of NSX Manager. Now the real work begins in the next video. I'm going to go through and show you guys how to actually begin all the prep work that needs to be done. I'm going to go through an explanation as to why you need everything again, just as a quick recap so it's fresh in your heads instead of you trying to recall what we did in this video. Until next time, guys, thanks so much for stopping by. If you haven't already done so, please leave a comment in the comment section below if you have any questions. Like, share, and subscribe, and I'll catch all of you in the next video.